It happened in the blink of an eye. The water hit Cynthia's face with a loud splash, shocking everyone inside the luxury Lagos restaurant. People dropped their forks. A woman gasped. A child even cried. Sandra stood there, trembling with rage, the now empty plastic bottle in her hand. Her sharp voice cut through the room like a knife. "You think you can seduce my husband with your fake smile and tight dress?" she shouted, her chest rising and falling as if her lungs were on fire. "Cheap little waitress!" The entire restaurant froze. Waiters stopped serving. Diners stopped chewing. Eyes darted between Sandra and the young waitress, now dripping wet in her soaked uniform. Cynthia wiped her face slowly. Her lips trembled not from fear, but from the effort to hold back her rage. For a moment, silence wrapped the room in suspense. Then Cynthia took a deep breath and stared at Sandra squarely in the eyes. "If not for your husband," Cynthia said slowly, firmly, "I would have slapped you so hard your wig would spin." A sharp gasp echoed. "But because of him," Cynthia continued, turning slightly to Andrew, "I'll walk away. But let this be the last time you ever try this nonsense with me." Sandra flinched, but Cynthia wasn't finished. "I've saved my number in your husband's phone," she added, snatching Andrew's phone and tapping quickly. "Saved it as Cynthia Waitress. If he calls, I'll come, and I'll come prepared." With that, she tossed the phone gently back at Andrew, wiped her wet face with a napkin, and walked out with her head high. Andrew didn't say a word. Not one. But as his eyes followed Cynthia out, something in him changed. For the first time in 5 years of marriage, Andrew Johnson, the billionaire tech CEO of John Tech, felt something break inside him. And for the first time in public, Sandra realized she may have just picked a fight with the wrong woman. 12 hours earlier, Sandra Jacob had always known she was lucky. Growing up in Mushin, where the sun hit the rooftops like a punishment, she never thought she'd end up living in a smart mansion with walls that talked and floors that glowed. She married Andrew Johnson, the man every woman in Lagos secretly wanted. Handsome, calm, and rich. But life with Andrew wasn't as smooth as the marble kitchen counter she never used. You see, Sandra didn't know how to cook. And worse, she didn't care. "Why stress over rice and stew," she would say, flipping her Brazilian wig, "when we can eat at Radisson Blu?" Andrew tried. He begged. He even enrolled her in a short culinary class in Lekki. But she only attended once, took pictures for Instagram, and never went back. "Baby," she told him one day, "I'm too busy managing your company's data analytics to stir pots." He gave up asking. Still, Andrew thought the solution was simple. Hire a cook. But every time he tried, Sandra found a problem. Too flirty, too young, too curvy, too beautiful. The last cook, Amaka, only lasted a week, fired for smiling while serving Andrew juice. "She wants to steal my husband," Sandra said. Andrew laughed it off, until it wasn't funny anymore. And that day, after a long board meeting at John Tech, the couple stopped at their usual restaurant. They ordered jollof rice and grilled turkey, and Andrew noticed the new waitress, Cynthia. She was polite, respectful, and fast on her feet. She smiled with genuine warmth. She reminded him of something he hadn't felt in a long time. Ease. When they were done eating, and Cynthia brought their bill, Andrew looked up at her and said, "You cooked this?" She laughed shyly. "No, sir, but I assisted the chef today." "Good, you're talented. Can I get your number?" he said casually. Sandra's brain didn't register at first. She was sipping her water, scrolling her phone. But when she looked up and saw Cynthia calling out her digit sand, her husband saving either hands shook. Before anyone could stop her, the water bottle was in the air. And then, splash. Back at the car, Andrew didn't speak as they drove home. His lips were tight, his eyes hidden behind his sunglasses. Sandra sat fuming beside him. "You didn't even defend me," she said, breaking the silence. He didn't answer. "She insulted me in front of everyone." Still nothing. Sandra folded her arms. "So that's it? You'll let a waitress talk to me like that?" Andrew sighed, pulled the car to the side, and turned off the ignition. "Do you even hear yourself?" he asked, turning to face her. "Every woman around me is a threat to you. You can't cook. Won't let anyone else cook. And yet you attack anyone who dares show me respect. She wants to seduce you. She was doing her job, Andrew barked back. Maybe if you allowed people do theirs, we won't be eating out every night. Sandra opened her mouth, then closed it. She had no words. He started the car again. Don't worry, he said. I won't invite her home. I know your type. But one day you'll push me too far. Sandra stared at him. The silence in the car felt heavier than Lagos traffic. Little did she know, that day had already come. The next morning, while Sandra was still asleep, Andrew made a call from his study. Cynthia, he said calmly, I'm sending you money. You'll resign from that waitress job today. You deserve better. On the other end of the line, Cynthia smiled. I'm ready, sir. He hung up and stared out the window with a look that said he was done waiting for peace. He was going to create it. 6 months had passed, and Sandra had no idea that every Saturday when Andrew said he was visiting the data center in Lekki, he was actually going somewhere else. Somewhere peaceful, somewhere warm, somewhere where his food was cooked with love and his presence welcomed without tension. Banana Island. A quiet, well-secured corner of Lagos, reserved for the elite. It was there, behind gold-plated gates and manicured hedges, that Cynthia now lived. No longer in a restaurant apron, but in a flowing silk robe. No longer serving tables, but sipping freshly blended juice beside a chef she now called Mama. Because yes, Cynthia didn't come alone. She had brought her mother from the village the moment Andrew transferred 25 million naira to her new account. Resign, rest, reinvent yourself, Andrew had said. And she had obeyed. Back at the Johnson mansion, Sandra was getting suspicious. Andrew was calmer these days. He didn't complain about food anymore. In fact, he didn't even care whether she cooked or not. That scared her, because Andrew used to nag. He used to remind her that she couldn't even make fo riro without burning the vegetables. He used to text her links to YouTube cooking videos. Now, nothing. Instead, he came home full, not just of food but of peace. That night, she finally asked. You don't complain anymore, she said, leaning on the doorway of their bedroom. Did you find a secret chef, or what? Andrew looked at her for a long moment. I stopped expecting anything, he said quietly. It helps. Sandra scoffed. You're hiding something. He shrugged. Think what you want. She wanted to push, to demand, but something in his voice made her pause. She knew that tone, that empty calm. It was the sound of a man who had already walked away in his heart. Meanwhile, at Cynthia's mansion, dinner was ready. Fo riro, pounded yam, grilled tilapia, chilled zobo, all cooked to perfection. Andrew sat across from Cynthia in her cozy, candle-lit dining room. This feels like home, he said, wiping his hands. Cynthia smiled. You built it for me. Of course it feels like home. You've changed, Andrew said. I had to, she replied. You believed in me. And you've made me believe in something again. What's that? He took her hand. That peace and love can live in the same house. They shared a quiet moment, interrupted only by the laughter of Cynthia's mother, watching a Yoruba movie in the living room. You know what I want? Andrew said suddenly. What? A second wife. You... Cynthia choked on her drink. What? I'm serious. She stared at him, wide-eyed. You're already married. And I've tried. For 5 years I tried. But Sandra doesn't want to change. She won't learn, she won't adapt, and she treats everyone like a threat. I'm tired, Cynthia. You want to marry me to punish her? She asked. No, he said. I want to marry you because I feel alive around you. Because when I'm here, I don't feel like a stranger in my own life. I'm not asking you to replace anyone. I'm asking you to join me officially. If you say yes, we'll travel far away and do it quietly. No drama, no crowd. Cynthia swallowed hard. But what about your daughter, Amara? She loves you already. She doesn't even remember you as the waitress who got soaked with water. She remembers you as the woman who makes her laugh, and teaches her to braid her doll's hair. Cynthia didn't answer. Not yet. But deep in her heart, she knew. Her answer was already forming. 3 months later, it broke Sandra. She was in the living room when it happened. Her phone buzzed with an NTA news alert. Billionaire tech CEO Andrew Johnson marries former waitress in private Maldives ceremony. Her heart stopped. She stared at the screen, then at the TV, then back at the screen. And there it was. A video. Andrew in a sleek cream-colored kaftan. Cynthia in a breathtaking white dress. The ocean behind them. Her husband smiling like she had never seen before. She dropped the phone. "Business trip?" she whispered, remembering what he had told her 3 days ago. Her knees buckled. She sat on the floor, her breath shallow. "Waitress," she whispered again, now trembling. Tears fell before she realized she was crying. Hours later, Andrew returned from the trip. No luggage, no guilt. Sandra waited for him at the front door, holding his passport. "You really did it?" she asked, her voice shaking. He stepped past her calmly, tossing a brown envelope on the coffee table. Inside it were divorce papers. "You can sign if you want out," he said. "But if you want to stay, know this. I won't chase peace anymore. I'll live where it exists. You either learn to adapt or keep fighting shadows." Sandra's mouth hung open. "You married her." "I did. You lied to me. You lied to yourself for years. You pushed away every solution, every suggestion. Cynthia didn't steal me. You gave me away." Sandra stood frozen. She realized he wasn't shouting. He wasn't angry. He was just done. And somehow, that was worse. Sandra sat on the bedroom floor that night, staring at her reflection in the mirror. Her hands trembled as she touched her face, now wet with tears. "I lost him," she whispered. "I really lost him." Suddenly, her daughter Amara walked in, holding a drawing. "Mommy, look, Auntie Cynthia helped me draw this." It was a picture of Andrew, Cynthia, Amara, and Sandra holding hands. Sandra stared at the drawing, and for the first time, the wall of pride around her heart began to crack. The mansion felt different now. Sandra could still walk the halls like before, but the silence was heavier. Amara's laughter still echoed through the walls, but it no longer belonged only to her. It now carried the memory of another woman's voice, Cynthia's. A woman Sandra once soaked in water, now legally married to her husband. And that morning, she heard it with her own ears. "Good morning, Auntie Sandra," Cynthia said as she entered the house, gently holding a covered food tray. Sandra sat in the living room, her fingers clutching the armrest like it was her last shield. Amara rushed from upstairs. "Auntie Cynthia!" she squealed. Sandra's heart broke a little more. She used to be the only woman her daughter looked up to. Now she shared that role with a woman she had once humiliated in public. Cynthia set the food down carefully. "I brought some breakfast for Mr. Andrew and Amara. I made yam porridge with Yugu Livshi's favorite." Sandra stayed quiet, but Cynthia wasn't here to fight. Not today. Not anymore. "I also packed some for you, in case you're hungry," she added softly. Sandra blinked, unsure how to respond. Was this pity? Was this revenge? Or was it just kindness? Cynthia didn't wait for a reply. She gave Amara a kiss on the forehead and left as gently as she had come. Later that week, Andrew called a family meeting. Sandra arrived in a long green wrapper and gel, sitting beside Andrew like old times. But it wasn't like old times. Cynthia entered wearing a simple gown, no makeup, just grace. She greeted Sandra respectfully and sat beside her husband. Amara took the seat between both women, unaware of the invisible tension. Andrew cleared his throat. "Things are different now, but we're still one family. For Amara's sake, and for peace, I want this house to reflect that." Sandra looked away, lips tight. Cynthia simply nodded. "We will respect each other. No competition, no dragging. This isn't about ego, it's about unity." Then, to everyone's surprise, Sandra spoke. "I understand," she said, her voice quiet. Andrew raised a brow. "I made mistakes. I see that now. I pushed away help. I pushed away peace. I let fear ruin my home. She turned to Cynthia, her eyes glistening. I'm sorry. I know I can't erase what I did, but I'm sorry. Cynthia blinked rapidly, clearly shaken. I forgive you, she whispered. Andrew smiled faintly. Sandra added, It may take me time, but I'll try to accept what I've lost and what's now part of my life. It wasn't easy, but it was real. 1 year later, Cynthia gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. Her name was Monica. Andrew cried in the hospital room as he carried his newborn daughter. Cynthia smiled weakly from the bed, still glowing from delivery. Andrew leaned down and kissed her forehead. Thank you, he said. For what? She asked. For bringing back life into mine. Just then, Sandra arrived with Amara, holding a bouquet of fresh roses. She walked in carefully and looked at the baby. She's beautiful, she whispered. Tears in her eyes. Cynthia smiled. Would you like to hold her? Sandra hesitated, then nodded. And there, in that bright hospital room, Sandra held the baby of the woman she once saw as a threatened for the first time in a long time. Peace settled in her heart. Cynthia resumed at Jontech as the company's new accountant. Many employees were shocked when they found out the new staff was not just the CEO's wife, but the same woman once mistaken for a mere waitress. She didn't brag. She didn't boast. She simply worked. She balanced ledgers, audited expenses, and proved within 3 months that she was more than just a pretty facish, was valuable. Sandra returned to her role as the lead data analyst. It was awkward at first, but slowly, the two women learned to work together. One handled numbers. The other handled data. Together, they kept Jontech stronger than ever before. And often, after work, they would sit at the staff lounge, drink Zobo together, and talk about motherhood, work stress, and Amara's obsession with airplanes. 12 years later, the sky above the Nigerian aviation school sparkled with fireworks. Laughter, music, and applause filled the air. Amara had just been announced as the best graduating pilot of her class. Sandra clapped proudly, her face lit with joy. Cynthia wiped a tear, whispering, Our daughter made it. Andrew held them both by the shoulders. She's our pride. The entire family stood together, cheering as Amara stepped forward in her white pilot uniform, grinning from ear to ear. TV reporters rushed toward her. How do you feel, Captain Amara Johnson? One asked. Amara laughed. I feel like I can fly both in the sky and in life. Years flew like the planes Amara now piloted. At 22, Amara married Benjamina, charming software engineer. The wedding shut down Lagos for a whole weekend. Sandra wore gold. Cynthia wore royal blue. Both women danced side by side like best friends. A year later, Amara had a baby boy. She named him Elijah. 3 months after, Cynthia's daughter Monicano, 23, graduated from the University of Lagos as a medical doctor. She, too, got married to her college sweetheart, Jacob, in a classy garden wedding. And when she gave birth to a baby girl, she named her Daniela. The two daughters, once born into a house of rivalry, were now mothers, raising their own children side by side. 12 years after that fateful splash in the restaurant, Sandra stood behind a podium at a marriage conference. She looked at the crowd of young women, some single, some married, many broken, all listening. I'm not here as a victim, she began. I'm here as a woman who once let pride destroy her peace. She told them everything, how she lost her husband's heart, how her refusal to change invited another woman in, and how she had to swallow her pride and accept the woman she once insulted as her co-wife. By the time she finished, the hall was quiet. Then, applause erupted. Women stood, clapping. Some cried. Sandra smiled, blinking away tears. She glanced backstage, where Cynthia stood, nodding with pride. Their daughters sat in the front row, Amara and Monica clapping the loudest. Sandra took a deep breath. I pray none of you repeat my mistake. But if you do, I hope you have the strength to admit it, and the grace to fix what you broke. The hall was still buzzing after Sandra's powerful speech. Guests formed small groups, whispering about her honesty. Some took selfies with her. Others hugged her tightly, calling her Mama Wisdom. But Sandra wasn't thinking about the applause. Her eyes were still on Cynthia. Cynthia stood backstage, smiling warmly. And in that moment, the memories hit Sandra like waves. 12 years ago, she poured water on that same woman in a fit of jealousy. Today, that woman stood in support of her, clapping for her growth. What a full circle. But life wasn't done spinning its wheel of surprises. Because as Sandra stepped down from the stage and joined her family, Andrew stood and made an announcement no one saw coming. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, taking the microphone, "please don't leave yet. My wife Sandra and I have something very special to share." Sandra blinked. "We do?" Cynthia gave a knowing smile, but said nothing. Andrew continued, 12 years ago, our family almost collapsed. My fault. Her fault. Both of us. But we rebuilt it. Together. And today, it's stronger than ever. He turned to Sandra and held her hand. "I know you didn't expect this, but please join me in making it official again." And just like that, a man walked up with a small black box. Gasps. Sandra's hands flew to her mouth. Andrew got down on one knee. "Marry me again," he said softly. This time, not as a desperate husband trying to fix things, but as a man who's proud of the woman you've become. Tears welled in Sandra's eyes. Everyone stood frozen. Even Cynthia wiped a tear. Amara held Monica's hand and whispered, "Did you know about this?" Monica grinned. "Daddy's been planning it for months." Sandra looked down at Andrew, the same man she had nearly lost, and laughed through her tears. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes." Applause shook the room. Phones flashed. The crowd cheered like it was a fairy tale. And in a way, it was. 3 weeks later, the vow renewal was held at the exact restaurant where it all began. The same restaurant where Sandra had once poured water on Cynthia. But this time, she was dressed in an elegant blue gown, and Cynthia stood by her side as her matron of honor. Their daughters, Amara and Monica, were the bridesmaids. Andrew, still dashing in his silver agbada, watched Sandra walk toward him with a soft smile. And when they stood before the guests, hand in hand, Sandra spoke from her heart. "I once tried to control everything around me because I feared losing what I loved. But in the process, I almost destroyed it. Thank you for staying, and for giving me a second chance." Andrew kissed her hand and replied, "Thank you for becoming the woman I always knew you could be." After the ceremony, the family gathered at the reception lounge, laughing, eating, and sharing stories. Benjamin tossed his son Elijah in the air, while Jacob helped little Daniela fix her bow tie. Monica and Amara sat side by side, sipping mocktails. "You know," Monica said, "if Mommy Cynthia had slapped Mommy Sandra that day, we probably wouldn't be sitting here today." Amara burst into laughter. "True! We'd be in court, not in gowns." They both laughed, their bond stronger than blood. Nearby, Cynthia and Sandra sat on a soft white couch, watching their daughters giggle. "You were right, Cynthia," Sandra said quietly. "About what?" "That love and peace can live in the same house, if the women inside are willing to put down their swords." Cynthia nodded. "It took us years, but we made it." Sandra chuckled. "And I'll never forget the day I poured water on you." "I forgave you the next day," Cynthia replied. "I just needed time to show it." They clinked their glasses together in a silent toast to growth, healing, and everything in between. Twist comes knocking. Just when everything seemed perfect, a knock came at the door of the Johnson mansion one rainy evening. Sandra opened, eyed and froze. Standing in the rain was a young woman, soaked and shivering, holding a toddler in her arms. "Please," the girl said weakly, Is this Mr. Andrew Johnson's house?" Sandra stepped outside. "Yes. Who are you?" The girl's lips trembled. "My name is Grace, and I think he's my father." Sandra's knees buckled. "What did you say?" Before she could answer, Andrew appeared behind Sandra, his face pale, lips parted. "Grace," he whispered. The girl nodded. "I'm your daughter, and I've been looking for you for 17 years. Thunder rolled in the distance. The toddler began to cry softly. Cynthia rushed to the door as well, her eyes darting between Andrew, Sandra, and the stranger. Amara and Monica stood behind them, frozen. And Sandra? Her breath caught in her throat, because just when she thought peace had returned for good, another secret from the past knocked at their door. Literally. The rain poured harder. Grace stood motionless in the doorway, soaked to the skin. Her little boy clung to her neck, shivering from the cold. Sandra's lips parted, but no words came out. Cynthia's hand slowly gripped the doorframe. Andrew took a step forward. "Grace, my Grace," his voice cracked. "From Mary?" Grace nodded, trembling. "Yes, my mum, Mary. She died 2 years ago. Before she died, she told me you were my father. She made me promise to find you. She said, you weren't a bad man, just scared." Andrew's eyes widened. He staggered slightly, placing one hand on the wall for balance. Sandra turned slowly to him, her voice now shaking. "Who is she, Andrew?" He couldn't speak, so Grace did. "My mother met him in Enugu. They were friends. She worked as a lab scientist at a company your husband once invested in. She told me everything. How they lost contact after a misunderstanding. She said he never knew I existed. That's why. I'm here." Sandra's knees nearly gave way, but Cynthia caught her. "You mean, all these years?" Sandra whispered. "You had another daughter out there?" Andrew stepped forward, his voice hoarse. "I didn't know. You never mentioned a woman named Mary to me." Sandra snapped, her voice rising. "I didn't think she left without a word. I thought she moved on." Grace's son began to cry harder, breaking the tension. Cynthia was the first to act. She stepped forward, gently took off her scarf, and wrapped it around the toddler. "Let's not leave a child in the cold," she said quietly. "Whatever this is, the child is innocent." Sandra's chest heaved, but even in her rage, she couldn't ignore the little boy's cries. She moved aside slowly. "Come inside," she said tightly. "Let the boy be warm, then we'll talk." An hour later, the living room was quiet, but heavy. Grace had changed into dry clothes. Amara had loaned her some. The toddler now slept peacefully on Cynthia's lap, gently rocked. Sandra sat opposite them, her hands folded tightly. Andrew paced the floor like a man sentenced by his own silence. Grace sat nervously, watching everyone. "I don't want to ruin your family," she said at last. "I didn't come for money. I only came because I wanted to meet him. I wanted my son to know his grandfather." Sandra looked at her sharply. "Grandfather?" Grace nodded. "His name is Uche." That name stung Sandra like a thorn. That was the name she once considered for a second child with Andrew back, when they thought they'd have one. Andrew stopped pacing. He walked over slowly and knelt in front of Grace. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I didn't know. If I had known, I swear." Grace wiped her tears. Sandra looked down, fighting a war inside her. This wasn't Cynthia. Cynthia was the woman who came into her life because of her own pride. But Grace? Grace was a child Andrew had unknowingly fathered, a child raised by another woman, a child who had just found his way home. 2 months later, the Johnson family held a private DNA test. The result was positive. Andrew was Grace's biological father. The news made headlines again. But this time, the family didn't hide. They released a public statement. "A child is never a mistake. She is a missing piece. We welcome Grace and her son, Uche, as part of our family with open arms." Cynthia stood beside Sandra during the press briefing. Cameras clicked. Bloggers wrote headlines. But inside the family, healing had already started. Grace moves in. A guest house was prepared on the mansion property for Grace and her son. Sandra checked it herself. She supervised the repainting. She picked out the curtains. When Cynthia asked why, she replied, "If I don't guide this girl, who will? At least, she's not here to take anyone's husband." Cynthia smiled, and the two women, once strangers, once enemies, became like pillars beside each other. One evening, as the sun set over the compound, Sandra and Cynthia sat on the balcony. Sandra turned to her and said quietly, "I thought losing my husband to you would be my biggest shame." But it made you stronger, Cynthia replied. Sandra nodded. Now, having Grace here, it hurts, but I think maybe it's not about me anymore. Maybe it's about healing this family for the next generation. They looked down at the garden where Uche, Elijah, and Daniela were playing with their toy planes. Look at them, Cynthia whispered. They don't care who their mother is. They only care that they're loved. Sandra smiled faintly. I guess it's time we all acted like grown-ups. Years passed. Grace enrolled in the University of Lagos to study nursing. Andrew paid her fees without question. Sandra helped her balance motherhood and studies. Cynthia became Uche's godmother. Amara and Monica continued to flourish, both now working with their husbands on international projects. Amara flew planes across continents. Monica worked in Geneva with the UN's medical corps. But whenever they were home, the house was full of laughter. The wounds had healed, and somehow, the broken pieces made a mosaic even more beautiful than the original. A family united. At Andrew's 70th birthday celebration, the entire family gathered in a luxurious Lagos event hall. Cynthia and Sandra sat side by side in matching Aso-Ebi lace. Andrew gave a moving speech. I was once a man torn between peace and pride, but today I stand as a man surrounded by love. Not because I was perfect, but because the women in my life chose healing. He turned to his daughters Amara, Monica, and Grace. You are the future, and I hope your children grow up in homes filled with truth, love, and humility. He raised his glass to forgiveness, to second chances, and to the women who held my world together when I didn't deserve it. Everyone stood. Cynthia wiped a tear. Sandra smiled. Grace nodded with pride. And in the crowd, little Uche stood on a chair and shouted, Grandpa Andrew, you're the best! The entire hall laughed, and for the first time in a very long time, Sandra, Cynthia, and Grace held hands. 3 women, 1 family, 1 story, and a lesson that would live beyond them. If you like this story, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel for more interesting stories.